Hello, hello. Welcome, creatives. I'm so excited to see you all here today. This is part two of our series on creating and setting creative goals for the new year. So let's get right into it. All right, so welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. I am Shannon. This is the story scene where we come together to help you design and write and create bold, brilliant, and beautiful stories. And we're in part two, as I said, of our planning our creative year. This is the goal setting part. So this is really exciting. This is one of my favorite parts of the year. As you might know if you've been following me for a while, I love the end of the year and the beginning of the year because I think it gives us such a great chance to pause and reflect on where we've been, where we want to go, reconnect with those dreams, and really get things going and setting our intentions for the new year. So let's take a minute and just kind of review what we did last week as we set up. We set up for our creative year. We did a creative audit last time, and I was working from this booklet, which you can access. I've dropped that in the description box. This is a free workbook that I created just to kind of help myself with some questions that I wanted to reflect on and think through as I kind of took stock of the year and prepared to go forward. So you can grab that if that would be helpful to you, but I'm just going to quickly review the three steps that we talked about last week, and then we're going to get into our goal setting today. So step one last week that we talked about was an audit, and we went over four different areas of our creative life that we want to kind of take stock of: our projects and our progress, our productivity, our environment that we work in, and of course, our financial picture. If we're looking to make this into a full time career, which I think a lot of us do want, is to have a full time creative career, money is a big part of that, right? So, financials are an important part of doing our creative review. Step two, I said, it's really important to celebrate our wins. I think we can have the temptation sometimes to really beat ourselves up over goals maybe that we haven't completed, or maybe we didn't make as much progress as we wanted to. And so the temptation can be to kind of beat ourselves up a little bit. But I think it's really important to start off on a really positive note and to celebrate the progress that we did make. So celebrating your wins, huge part of this. And then we can get into the review process where we say, okay, where do we need to make some changes? What in my environment needs to change to help my productivity? What could I do to help myself get better about managing deadlines, for example? All of those kinds of things that go into the review process. So the step one is gathering all of this data about your productivity and about your creative career progress. And then we kind of work through um, analyzing that data, right? Doing something with it so that we make sure that we know how to set up for what we're talking about today, which is actually setting our goals. Um, this is a really important part, I think, of the creative process because it can be really tempting for us to just kind of throw things at the wall, I guess, maybe creatively. We just sort of grab a project, something inspires us, we just kind of grab it and we run with it. But I think part of this goal setting process is to balance that type of thing with our intentionality. That's a really important part of all of this, is to become really intentional about what we're doing. And so let's kind of reflect on what that looks like. I call this like the balance between planning and pantsing your creative career. If you didn't see my blog post that went up on January 1st, on stage 32, about planning and pantsing your creative career, I've linked to that in the description box. Also, I definitely recommend checking that out. I'm going to go through some of the highlights of that article here today, but this is kind of where I talk about, like, we want to balance intentionality and being really directed in our goals with opening up opportunity for what I call like serendipity, right? So being aware of those opportunities that you can jump on when they cross your path because they are the right thing for you. And that involves knowing where you want to go so that you can correctly identify those opportunities. Okay, so when we set our goals, we are going to start with our long term vision. This is a really important part of the process, and I encourage you, if you have never done this before, to try to do a little bit of visualization for not just for your 2022 goals or for this year's goals, but for your 3-year, 5-year, and even 10-year creative goals. And that can seem really scary, and it can seem like, how am I possibly supposed to visualize what's, a decade from now is going to look like? But it's worth kind of exploring. If you can set your intention that far out and that projection that far out, it helps you to backtrack, right? And to kind of back plan what you need to do to get there. Without that, we're again, we're just kind of picking things at random, and it's not necessarily all focused in one direction towards the goals that we want to achieve in our creative career. So I encourage, I've seen a lot of life coaches, if you've done any kind of following of life coaches or anything else, they will often encourage you guys to do like a visualization exercise, a journaling exercise. If that's your jam, then totally do that. I recommend that, because I think that it helps us to really clue in, not just to the, oh, that thing out there, but the emotion of it, right? How would it feel, to get that phone call? How would it feel, to get that email in your inbox, of like, somebody's interested in your work, somebody's picking it up, you're getting that call from your manager, or you're getting that call from your agent. What does that feel like? Because if we can tap into the feeling, that's where we get our motivation from. And so that can be really helpful, right? And then you can do a vision board thing if you want to. I mean, all of these are just tools, and you know yourself best, right? So if that kind of stuff is motivating to you, then do it. If it's not super motivating, then just, keep it front of mind somehow, where you're able to kind of keep that in your mind. So I definitely recommend doing a visualization or a planning exercise where you're thinking about, your 3 and 5 year goal projections. Um, Once you've done that, then we're going to backtrack, right? As I said, we're going to look for those mile markers on the road so that you are able to figure out, like, what do you need to do this year in 2022 for those goals that are maybe you're looking to achieve by 2025 or beyond, right? So those are the mile markers that we're looking for. And being aware of those, as I've said, is really important, to your decision making. So what might that look like? I think sometimes it might be helpful, to get an example of, like, how do you break something like that down? How would you, like, set a big, big goal? And then what do you need to do exactly to break it down into those smaller steps and assign those mile markers? So let's use the example of, if you're a screenwriter and you want to sign with a manager in the coming year, or maybe even the next couple of years. What exactly goes into that process? There is actually quite a number of steps that you can follow that will get you closer to achieving that goal. So let's think through what those are. The very first thing that you're going to need, and a lot of them agree on this, is that you need two really solid pieces of material to be considered for representation. This is kind of a standard, requirement, I guess, and it's just well worth it. It's really well worth it to have two very solid pieces, because the thing is, you hook them on one piece, and then they say, okay, well, what else do you have? Right? That's always the question, is the what else do you have? And you don't want to be caught cold on that question. And you also want to be able to demonstrate that you can deliver repeatedly, right? This is not just like a miracle project that happened, that was a one-off, and there's no really demonstrated pattern that you can repeat that success, right? They want to see two pieces of material from you so that they know that you are going to be able to deliver on what you promise in that first project. Okay, so two really solid pieces of material. Okay, the second thing you might need is a written pitch. So if you're going to start pitching, representatives, managers, agents, people like that, you're going to need a written pitch document. Okay, so that's another thing that you're going to add to your list of things to prepare. You want to have practice doing verbal pitching. Okay, so you might have a written pitch that you can submit, but you also want to be able to handle yourself in a verbal pitch. So getting some practice, finding some friends who will listen to you, doing that kind of thing, building up your confidence, in video meetings or on phone meetings, things like that. Really great skills. That's a skill that we can add to our, what skills do we want to work on, practicing confidence on video, or on the phone, so that when we are in the room, with someone and doing a verbal pitch, or if you're lucky enough to get an in-person meeting with someone at this point, things are still so up in the air, that you can do this face to face as well. Okay, so that's a skill to be working on. What about budget? So in financial planning terms, okay, if you're going to be using a service like Stage 32, who has, like, they have fantastic pitch opportunities available for you, but they cost money, right? So you want to be judicious about who you're pitching, but you also want to have some money set aside for that purpose, right? You want to make sure that you're ready to do that. If you're looking for example, a literary agent, you're planning on going to some writing conferences. We're going to talk about conferences in a second here, but writing conferences cost money, right? And so being able to get in front of people and sort of figuring out how to pay for those opportunities to get in front of people, that's going to need to be planned for, right? Those are expenses that you should add to your business budget. If you're planning to list on some of these different script sites, Blacklist or whatever, also, right, costing some money. If you're, those are just all things that kind of go into the process, getting those things set up, making sure that you're prepared, right? So there's just a few examples of some of the mile markers that are on the way to signing with a manager, right? So there's the prepping of the material, but then there's sort of all of these other like skills that kind of go along with it. Practicing verbal pitching, learning how to write a synopsis, learning how to write a summary, all of those are skills. Having the financials in place so that you're prepared financially for whatever investment you need to make to open those doors for yourself, right? So that's all part of that one goal, and we kind of break it down and we say, okay, how am I going to get my two pieces of material? Do I have a script that is more or less ready to go? Could I get it in front of somebody and get some feedback? Working through those processes. So each one of those steps that I just listed out, you can break it down even further than that. And that's how we're able to go from I have a big 2022 goal down to I have a first quarter goal or a first half of the year goal to I have a first quarter goal to I have this month's goal to this week, this day, right? And set my intention that way. That's how we're able to do that. We break it down into those action steps each point along the way, but setting that big vision first and then breaking it down into those mile markers, that's the best way to go about it so that you are acting with intention each and every day and making that progress towards your goals. Okay, so that we talked about what are those milestones, being able to identify those milestones in your creative career, in your journey. For each project has milestones, right? We're looking at, okay, I've got my outlining part of the process, and then I have my drafting part, and then I have, getting feedback, and then I have the rewrite. Each thing we do, we can break it down into steps, and I think that's a really helpful way to approach um, our creative journey, is to be thinking about it in those terms and be breaking it down so we can plan for it. Okay, so what about project goals? Let's talk a little bit about projects. So we talked a little bit about career goals. Project goals, um, I talk in the Stage 32 article on planning enhancing your creative career about you doing a development slate. And I'm actually going to do a separate video on this because I realize, like, I have a way that I set this up in Google Docs, and it's a little bit more of an organized project folder, if you will, or a way of accessing all of your projects, your project list, than just simply a random kind of collection of notes in Evernote or a file folder or whatever you might have. So I want to walk you through that because that might be helpful for you. So let me know in the comments below if you think that would be helpful to you to know how to set up a development slate, what kinds of things go in it, so that you can see at a glance where you're at, what projects you have ready to go, that kind of thing. Let me know if that would be helpful. But that is a way that you can choose the projects that you want to work on intentionally, because you know that you have certain ones that are out and you can work on other ones. That, for example, if you're trying to build a reputation in a certain genre, I'm a science fiction writer, so I use the example of, when I'm looking at projects, I'm really kind of aiming in the science fiction direction with the choices that I make, even though historical fiction is a huge passion of mine and is something that I'm looking forward to doing more work in eventually. But right now, I'm consistently choosing projects that are establishing a reputation in science fiction as a genre writer. So that's part of how I go through my development slate. And I say, yeah, I've got all these ideas for historical fiction projects, but that's not serving me right now, right? That's not serving me. My science fiction projects are where I need to be focused at the moment. Um, okay, so development slate, project goals. Going back to your creative audit, think about how many projects were you able to reasonably complete last year, and could you stretch yourself a little bit this year? Could you push it a little bit? You've learned some since last year, and if you're able to make some tweaks maybe to environment or to process and productivity, are you able to maybe amp up your production? What the title of this particular live is how to set creative goals you can actually keep. So we don't want to be so ambitious, right, that we just completely are like, there's no way, it's inhuman what we've set for ourselves. And I'm talking to myself, by the way. I have a very bad habit of setting very ambitious goals, with that sort of philosophy of if you shoot for the moon, you'll land among the stars kind of thing. But I tend to really push ambitious wise for projects that I set for myself. So I'm talking to myself as much as to anyone else when I say this. But thinking about how many projects you could complete and then making the decision based on those long-term goals and where you want to head, which ones in your project idea folder are going to get you there the fastest. Okay, so think about setting those project goals based on those sort of parameters. Okay. Something else to keep in mind as you're looking at your project goals, one of my favorite things to do, let's look at deadlines, contests, and conferences, right? Um, are you aiming to submit to some of the big contests this year? Those all have deadlines, right? And they have fees associated with them that are associated with those deadlines, right? So if you can jump in on the early bird pricing for some of these things, you will save yourself money. But it's important to kind of know when those deadlines are, how far out, and again, kind of keeping in mind your own productivity and your own pacing. What's reasonable for you? Could you push for the early deadline and know that you're going to at least hit the regular deadline if you really push hard for that, right? Okay, so kind of use those deadlines to help you. It's really a great idea to push yourself that way. Sometimes signing up for a contest or setting that intention will just help you get the project done because you need to submit, right? um, Same thing for conferences. Are you planning to attend any this year? Virtually or otherwise. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we can be doing some in-person conferences, which are the most fun. If you've done any virtual conferences over the last year, I mean, they're great. They're great education, but we all miss hanging out with our writer friends, right? I mean, we all miss kind of like getting to be in a room full of other people who are all going after the same dream as we are is just irreplaceable. So hopefully, fingers crossed for live conferences this year. But what conferences are you thinking about going to? Again, that impacts financials because you need to set aside travel budget, perhaps conference fees, things like that. So, put those down on your calendar as well. Mark those down. These are all things that are going to go on your calendar, whatever system you use for calendaring, Google Calendar, paper planner, whatever is your jam, but mark it down somewhere so that you can keep track of it. Um, Deadlines, like I said, are great for motivating yourself and for kind of pushing you if you need a push. And if that was a skill that you noticed in your audit that you needed help on, right? How did you do with meeting deadlines last year? Sometimes getting an outside deadline, if you're working on trying to build up, the ability to hold yourself to a personal deadline, like you set something and you go for it and you get it done by the deadline. Sometimes having the practice of needing to submit to something that has an actual deadline and you have to pay money for it can help you develop that skill, right? So that's something to think about. Okay, so let's deadlines, contests, and conferences. So those are all things that should go on your calendar and will impact again, sort of the project goals that you're setting. Career goals we talked about briefly already in the example of maybe signing with a manager. There are other career goals beyond that, right? Obviously, once you sign with a manager or an agent or a representative, your work is not done by any stretch. So it's worth reflecting on where you're at right now. where is the next step? What is the next step? And if you do have representation, it's a great conversation to have with them so that they can get on board with you and say, okay, these are the things that we want to see. We would love to see this for you this year. Let's figure out how we're going to do that. What they can help you figure out what projects might be worth investing in. So definitely don't be afraid to have that conversation. If you do have representation, that's kind of what they're there for. They're sort of there to help you manage your career. So definitely use them. I think it's a great conversation. Plus, I always kind of think like it shows a lot of initiative on your part if you're coming to them and saying, I want to have in January a conversation with you about what my year is going to look like. I think shows a lot of initiative on your part and shows that you want to be organized and you want to be moving forward. So it's a good conversation to have, I think. Um, let's talk a little bit about as well, and this kind of goes under career goals and also project goals. One of the things that I talk about in the article, the Stage 32 article on planning and pantsing your creative career, is the idea of growth and development. Growth and development, every living thing goes through these processes of growth and development, right? So growth has to do with just you're getting bigger, right? You have more projects under your belt, you have more reach, you have more influence, you have more fans of your work, you're building your network, all of those things. That's all growth, right? That's an outward sort of movement. Development in a living organism has to do with complexity, right? It has to do with how that organism is able to sustain the growth that it's going through, right? So these two things go hand in hand, and sometimes you'll see a lag in growth in order to allow for an acceleration in development, right? So you can think about, if you've had watched a dog grow from a puppy to a full grown dog, for example, or if you've had kids, you see this, right? So you see how this works. um, Growth and development in your creative career, development looks like skill building, right? What kinds of skills do you need to work on this year that are going to take your writing to the next level, so that you do have those two pieces of material that I mentioned before, or that you do have compelling stuff that you're sending out there, and that it's getting the attention of people, right? How are you managing that development wise? The projects that you choose are not only for development by producers and to get out there in the world, they are also for your development as a creative, right? So, for example, you could choose to write a certain project because you're like, you know what, I really need to work on developing my skills with world building. So you pick a project that's going to force you to do world building, right? Um, you could say, one of my goals for this year, for example, is to really build up my skills as a short story writer. Short stories are great for practicing economy and compression. They're excellent for cranking out material quickly. Takes a lot less time to do a short story than to do a full length screenplay or a novel or even a novella, right? So it's a great way to like keep those creative juices going. But it's a different skill set than anything else, right? So, one of my goals this year is to really work on um, short story writing and see what kind of skills do I need to build in that area. Um, Once you kind of know what sort of skills you want to work on, again, you can identify those projects that are going to help you get there. You can sort of attack those projects with that intention, that you're really going to work on dialogue, or you're going to work on scene description, you're going to work on world building, you're going to work on character development, whatever it is, you can kind of apply that. So skill development is really an important part of this. And it goes kind of under project goals and career goals because, again, without the skills being there, there's going to come a point where you're going to stagnate in your growth. It just will happen until your skills catch up to where you need to go, right? So the faster you can identify those skills that you need to build up, the faster you're going to move forward and you're going to be able to accelerate your growth. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Like thinking about it not just in terms of, you're getting out there and you're meeting people and like that's all awesome, but the skills as a writer have to be building alongside of that. One of the best ways to do that, by the way, if you're not sure where you're at exactly with your writing, and you don't have representation yet, or you don't have people that are like telling you like this is what you need to do, send a script out for coverage, right? Stage 32 has some great, and they're not sponsoring this, by the way. I just, because I do a lot of work with them, I know that they have these services available. But send it out for coverage there. I do script notes. Find a reader who will read your material and will give you honest feedback, and help you to identify those skills that you need to work on. That's part of what creative coaching is for. And it's like anything. If you've set that New Year's goal that we all sort of set every year, right? Like it's sort of almost a joke, and that you're going to get in shape this year, or you're going to eat right. And, so much of that can be accelerated by hiring a health coach or a fitness coach, or somebody, going to the gym and getting a couple sessions with a personal trainer, right? Because they will help you identify they short circuit the fumbling around in the gym trying to figure out what you need to work on, right? So that's a possibility as well. Find a writing group, find some writing partners, send it out for coverage, do whatever you need to do in order to get a clear-eyed sense of where you are and what skills you need to work on. Okay, so those are some really important aspects of your career and project goals. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Okay, last thing to kind of briefly talk about here, um, financial goals, right? Part of the audit that we did was to look at the financial picture and to say, okay, how am I doing? If this is something that I'm trying to make money at, then what's the cash flow looking like, right? And sort of assessing where you are and what you might want to add in or remove this year. A lot of times we end up spending a lot in the initial phases of our creative career as we're skilling up, as we're learning, as we're growing. And then it starts to pay off as we kind of get that experience and we start to get hired on for projects and things like that. So thinking about where you are financially, what kinds of budgets could you set for contests, for coverage, for conference attendance, for workshops and classes that you might want to take online, all of those things. Kind of have a plan for that, right? So that you can set aside the money that you need to, in order to kind of work towards your creative goals, right? And you can find so much stuff, guys. By the way, you don't have to spend a fortune to do this, right? There is so much information available for you now, that you really can build an education for yourself with like a library card in your Google search bar. Like you don't have to have an MFA. You don't have to go to film school for this. So much of it is just getting out there and just doing it. We learn by writing, right? We learn by doing. So I want to encourage you in that way as well. Don't feel like you have to have this massive budget to spend on all this stuff in order to make progress, because you really don't. You just need to, as I said, be strategic, right? Identify those things that you want to work on and develop, and then go after those things. And you'll learn in the process, right? So for example, like I mentioned before, like deciding you're going to write a project where you're working on world building, you chose the project to world build. Obviously, as you write the project, you're going to get better at dialogue and scene description, and doing your character development, and figuring out plot arc and all of the rest of it, right? We learn by doing. So even though we have a particular focus for a project, just the act of writing itself is going to move us forward, in our career. Okay. All right. What about this last thing? This is one of the favorite. This is one of the objections, right, that plotters get, in terms of like, oh, well, maybe you sit down and it's all by rote, right? You just write. It's like doing a fill in the blank exercise, right? If you're a plotter, and you just sit down at the keyboard and you just write. But I think that in a way, having a goal set up like this, like we've talked about, keeping in mind your 3 and 5 year goals, which is sort of like having a vague idea of where your script's going to end up, knowing where you're headed, it allows you, as I said at the outset, to be aware of opportunities that are going to move you forward, right? Your brain is sort of picking up on things and like looking for it for you. Mel Robbins talks a lot about this, the reticular activating system, and like that you can actually get your brain to help you without you even doing anything consciously about it, just by building your awareness of that's my goal, that's what I'm going after, and your brain is sort of filtering opportunities for you, right? Um, an email jumps out at you in your inbox because it has an opportunity in it that you've been looking for, right? So that kind of thing, which feels weird and it's like serendipity, but it actually does. It actually does work. So I think it's kind of like, the best kind of serendipity, the best kind of happy accident, because it's, in a way, it's guided by your intention. So that's, if you're worried about being too planned, being too scripted, um, don't worry about that quite so much. Just set your intentions, break it down as best you can so that you're making a little bit of progress each and every day. That's so valuable. So valuable. I can't emphasize enough. I think sometimes we think, oh, well, if I can't do 1,000 words a day, if I can't do 5 pages a day, what's the point? Like, I only have 10 minutes to write. I'm like running. I have, a job and a half that I'm holding down right now, whatever your situation is. And you think, I don't have enough time. Every little bit counts, right? And again, being this intentional will help you to see that like, okay, if I can put in 15 minutes and I can get something on the page, it's better than nothing on the page. And if I put a lot of those little somethings together, I'm going to end up with a finished product. It might take me a little bit longer, but it's going to get there, right? Slow and steady progress. Don't forget the tortoise and the hare, right? Don't forget that lovely fable, right? It really is earth changing, earth shattering when you realize that slow and steady incremental progress is progress, and to not be afraid of the small things that you can do on a daily basis, not being afraid to do a little bit of progress. Even if you can't do like the big thing that you think you want to do, don't get discouraged. Do what you can do until you can do what you want to do, right? Okay. So, I thank you, Ada. I appreciate your comment, giving that a sample Google Doc organization. I will definitely do a video on that for you guys as we get our development slates ready for this year, and I'll kind of walk you through how I've set mine up, and try to give you a template. If I can do that, I will give you a template for your own Google Doc, so that you can get that development slate put together for yourself, because I really do find that helpful. And in fact, as I was prepping for this session today, I was thinking like, oh, I really should redouble my focus on that particular tool, because I like to try to update it quarterly. It's been a while since I've updated mine, so it's actually a perfect opportunity for me to kind of walk you guys through it, because I can sort of update what I'm doing and show you guys how to do that. It really is a helpful tool, I think. And it's, again, it's one of those things that like gives you confidence, because you realize like, hey, I actually have a lot of ideas and I have made progress. I have these completed projects. And that's something to celebrate. So it's a great way to track where you're at and what you're working on. And you can put all kinds of notes in there for yourself about what the project meant to you, or where you want it to go, what else you might do with it, other opportunities for developing that, spinning it off into something else. So it's a really great tool, and so I will definitely do that. And thank you for dropping that comment. Okay, so that is the very swift and hopefully though helpful breakdown of how to set creative goals that you can actually keep. The it it's a two-part process, right? It has to go along with your self-awareness of who you are as a creative, what your productivity is like, what your environment is like, what you're reasonably able to keep working on during the upcoming year. And then, to set those goals that stretch you a little bit. As I said, could you get 10% better in your productivity? What would that look like? So instead of, working on 1,000 words a day, you're trying to do 1,100 words a day, just 10% better, right? That compounds again. So even just an incremental increase, can you do just a little bit better than you did last year? But that's why that audit process has to come first, because without that, again, we're setting goals that we we're not keyed into our own productivity. We're not keyed into the reality of what else is going on in our lives. And so we're setting goals like in a vacuum, and it's not going to work well as a system in the rest of our actual life. So sitting down with your calendar and getting a picture of what kinds of stuff you have going on for work, for family, what might, where are you taking vacation this year? Where were you anticipating some days off? Building all of that in will just help you as far as being able to achieve the goals that you set for yourself, because again, you'll know about it ahead of time. You can plan for it. Okay, guys. So I hope that was really helpful. Please drop in the comments if you have any other questions for me on any of the stuff that we covered today or last week. And I would be happy to do additional videos on those. I would love to build any of this out that you all have questions on. So definitely going to do some organization videos coming up here soon, probably month of January. This is the time when we all like to get our stuff organized. So we'll talk about using different tools. The development slate tool, using Evernote is one of my favorite tools. So we might do some stuff on how to get your writing notebook organized and how to just set yourself up for success. So let me know in the comments what would be helpful for you from an organization standpoint. And I am looking forward to walking with you into this new year. So I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time.